thinking about urban planning in the United States. And I'm particularly interested in neighborhoods, and she has lots of insights in that.
Okay, terrific. Two other people, there's a guy who wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class, and that was the title given by the publisher. The book doesn't have anything about class. It was going to be called something linked to Jane Jacobs, or a variation, something along those lines. And Dan Silver, well, we had a week of meetings, I said, in Toronto, and Dan Silver, my co-author of SceneScapes, said, why don't we have a meeting with Richard Florida? So we met, and he'd been in Russia for the first 3 days of the week, but we met him on Friday, and he came on his bike, as we were cyclists, and he crashed. So he showed up with blood all over his elbow, and he said, don't put it on the video. I don't want my wife to see that. Shh. So okay, so don't tell anybody. but we said, how was your trip to Russia? And he said, well, now in the place where we met, it was the center of sort of activist, non-traditional, anti-hierarchical organizations in Toronto. There were about 50, 60 organizations. There's a building I was at, probably this is out of date, but it was on Wall Street. And when Wall Street was having trouble with some of the banks and others, they rented, the buildings went bankrupt, the city took them over, and the city then leased these spaces to nonprofits, civic organizations right on Wall Street. And this is the same kind of thing. It was a building filled with these activist civic organizations. And at the entrance, there was a hallway with about 6 great big photographs and pictures of Jane Jacobs, who went to Toronto for the last decade or two of her life after
the last 40 years.
Last 40 years, okay. So thank you. So we were meeting there, and I said to Rich, if they put up your picture, what will you have underneath? And his answer was what the Russian television had, agent of homosexual gentrification and agent of neoliberal homosexual gentrification. Okay. Okay. So if anybody has read a little bit of Florida's stuff, that's his one-line summary. That's the Russian television one-line summary of what his books are about.
That's hysterical.
Okay. So we have a video of that, but I don't want to stop it to show you. Those are some of the videos from Toronto.
I do want to see that.
Okay. All right. So you can hear a number of themes. They do overlap a bit. Let's try to talk about something which we have pretty much in progress and need help on, and maybe take one or two that I've even talked about with one or two of you. And so let's develop one or two candidates that might be something that one or two or more of you might work on. One is we had a session at the Midwest Political Science Association. I think you were there.
Last year.
It was
in 2016.
I think 2016 is 2 years ago. No, I think it was 20. I think it was 20. Anyway, we had a session with multiple papers, and we had one of the co-editors of the Urban Affairs Review, and she said, how about submitting something for a special issue of the Urban Affairs Review? So we've got 4 papers, and then an introduction, and these are pretty much revised. The one which we're being held up by is the one on Trump, and it's more. Our core analysis. So the task could be to read either all these papers or maybe just the introduction, because what they do is take a paradigm in 4 different areas and then say, how does the scenes perspective change the paradigm, and then do empirical analysis, usually with some case studies, and a national comparative or international comparative analysis of how a better model of poverty or African American or artists leading to economic growth can emerge if we take into account more of the scene. The first paper is, well, I won't try to summarize them all, but they include a Jane Jacobs inspired paper by Hee-Sun Jeong, who did a PhD, who normally she's a postdoc here working with us. Her mother's in town, and so she's not here today, but she's going to talk about that. One, and then she's co-editor with me, and we've got the introduction and draft. So what I'm suggesting is some of you who are new might read that introduction to get a flavor of the 4 papers and how we can potentially use scenes in 2 ways, in a sense. One is to take specific propositions, such as the greater this, the greater that, X leads to Y leads to Z, which we've done in the Scenescapes book. The second way is more loose and broad, and to take either add a newer, broader set of relations linking with scenes and or new data, and in that way, and so you have each of these in these 4 papers, but they're not written with a tight, close connection to one set of propositions. They vary from paper to paper, but they all have they're transforming another paradigm. I mentioned Jane Jacobs versus the what's the term? The Starkitecture. So the Starkitects from Frank Gehry are, in that sense, a conceptual opposition to Jane Jacobs' bottom-up versus top-down. So it's hierarchy in the top versus bottom-up, and how these perspectives can each be incorporated in architecture, urban planning, design, and several have worked on transit. How transit facilities, and so she made a couple of presentations in Toronto, which will be on video, including, say, I think it was Portland, Oregon, had funding, and they lost their federal funding, and I think they put in something like $2 million of their own funding for the arts, to use the arts to bring people into the street and to make the entrances to subways safer. So Hee-Sun Jeong is from Korea. She worked as an architect in Seoul, Paris, and Chicago, and she was struck by the fact that the subways are scary and dangerous in the U.S. They're okay, they're pretty good in Paris, whereas in Seoul, they're cool. And so young people have concerts, they meet, they hang out around the subway stops at the major ones in Seoul, and in part this is because the government creates a list of concerts, programs, and arranges activities, publicizes them, and has concerts within or right immediately adjacent to big subway stops. And also this reduces automobile traffic. And so the last mayors of Seoul, one of which became president of Korea, have been trying to reduce automobile consumption and to increase public transit, using public transit in a scene-informed, thoughtful manner. So Hee-Sun has done this with photographs in Chicago, etc. So that theme is clear, and so I use it as a paradigm which she has used. She joined with Matt Patterson, who did his PhD on 2 big new art museums in Toronto, and then they contrasted really Toronto versus Chicago, and Minneapolis is in one of their papers. They have Toronto, Chicago, Minneapolis, in the ways in which civic engagement, and in this sense, the Metropolitan Planning Council is a big key civic organization. So where and how do the civic organizations matter? And at least our comparison with Toronto shows that the MHPC, and being started by Ferd Kramer, and linkages with the 2 dailies, Chicago generally has a much more hierarchical tradition coming from the political machine, and linked with why do we have a legitimate, among many Chicagoans, when Mayor Daley one was well, ask you new visitors to Chicago, and new folks that come from here. When Daley one was asked by the press, why'd you give those contracts to your son's insurance firm? What was his famous answer?
Well, he cleaned it up a bit from what we would normally say. His version was, there's a mistletoe hanging from my coattail.
Well, the public version was, it's a father's duty to help his sons. But the point is, he felt himself that was a legitimate answer, and he felt there were enough Chicago citizens, at least Democratic voters for him, that was what they should say. Daley too never said that. The city's political culture was transformed from Daley 1 to Daley 2 in part by one mayor called Harold Washington. So he was not just a black mayor, he changed the whole political culture. And that was the big story. Making it, when he was attacked for people taking bribes in his administration, he said, if this is true, they will be fired and the full force of the law will be used to prosecute them. And that was the answer of Harold Washington, and that's the answer in almost the same words of Daley too. So both of them may have, especially Daley too, had lots of examples that were documented of people taking bribes, et cetera, et cetera. But the public culture of Chicago was transformed by Harold Washington. It no longer was legitimate to take bribes, or let's say to use clientelism. This is big stuff in places that you folks are familiar with in the South, in Florida, and New Orleans, Miami, etc. As clientelism in most of the world is still the main way of doing politics, although it's now officially illegitimate in big places like China. The point of that story is we have a draft book called Trees and Real Violins, Building Post-Industrial Chicago, we published part of one book. We published a couple of papers which make these themes in the Scenescapes book, and there's a chapter in here called Buzz, and the Buzz chapter uses Toronto and Chicago in two case studies to talk about how buzz can be generated as part of a political scene. So buzz, in that sense, we're arguing is an arts-originated concept entering the political system where you can exchange buzz, such as the reputation of a Madonna or a Beyonce, to try to enhance your political position and linkage and support. If you and thus exchange resources, including more symbolic resources. Let me add one more quick. I mentioned Little Village. Let me add one more, which is because it's so nicely counterfactual. We had two smart assistant professors here. We're associate professors. I mentioned Robert Vargas. The other is Forrest Stewart. Forrest has two books. The second is not yet published, but it's called The Battle of the Bullet, and it's a Chicago study of gangs. The topic is no longer simply drugs, prostitution, gambling, and turf, but it's the videos about gambling, prostitution, and especially turf. So you have guys posing on videos with big guns. You know, those guys in the next neighborhood, if they come in here, this is what they get. And I've been there, and they've felt it from me. Okay, that's the kind of thing which you get, or even, I've let many of them have it. Things like that. Thousands of these are posted on YouTube right now. The interesting finding of Forrest Stewart, who spent several years with students and himself working with these guys one guy said, you know, I don't have a camera. I haven't got a decent set of pictures. I don't have a good video. Will you help me? And there's a guy who said he'll help me if we go up to near the Wisconsin border. So Forrest drives him up the Wisconsin border, and they talk the whole way, and that's how he's done some of his field work. And as they got up the Wisconsin border, they found a white guy who's got all kinds of fancy, expensive video equipment and who edits the videos of the black gang members who only got simple, small cameras. They send their videos, and he's one of the chief editors. He deletes sections which don't look tough enough. He puts in new music. He puts in things which make them very professional. And then, what is the main thing with that these guys are now, and gangs and individuals are competing over? The number of ratings on YouTube. That's what they're focused on. So it's the symbolization of the activities. And then talking to people such as driving them up to Wisconsin, you say, how many of these people are actually killing people? Less than 10%. 90% are what they call, what Forrest calls drillers. The drillers hold their guns in the video, but only 8-10% are killers. So don't believe the videos, because the videos tell you the opposite. And they make their videos, and they're very professionally edited by the guy up in there, the white guy near the Wisconsin border, and a German who can barely speak English, but who's really good at videoing in editing in Frankfurt, Germany, and who sends them back to Chicago. Okay, so interesting perspective, which is not the normal story. And so the paradigm of gangs fighting for, you know, these kinds of things is transformed in a symbolic, culturally more informed manner, using the arts, if we want to call YouTube and videos and music and entertainment, which people sometimes are looking at YouTube for entertainment, and so they're competing with other things. I'll mention one more topic, which shows the symbolization and the transformations of how these things are going on. There are two women working in L.A. who are college students. One has had 3 courses with me, named Juliet Lee. She's from Pasadena. The other is Victoria Keating, and they're working together on, and we found some things. Most of all, we had a discovery of a guy in Brooklyn who, and so the theme which we started was Juliet's idea, and Martha will get a kick out of this. We've been talking about arts districts. There's an arts district in LA. How does it have impact? Does it have impact? What, if so, what are the dynamics by which an arts district might have impact? Okay, that's a hot question which people are asking all across the U.S. and internationally. There are lots of papers on it. We have papers in Toronto. Okay, Juliet's idea is, and she's, okay, people, there's one in the LA Arts District is a house where they sell products. I've forgotten what it is, you know, Chanel or something, and it's all pink. And people come and they pose in front of the pink house, and they take photos, and they send the photos to their friends on Instagram. And so there are hundreds and there are thousands of X. And so then if you have a little, you know, logo from Instagram with that pink house, you can measure the number of Instagram photos and the score for the house compared to another site. And so who is painting the house pink, and who is doing this? Are they? So initially she thought it might be individual shops, but then she's gone further, and there's a guy in Brooklyn. So let me, okay, so guy in Brooklyn. The raw data is a CBS morning report. This is how hot this is and how much it's non-social science, but how we use non-social science sources when it's hot and when it's important enough. This guy, as this a couple of weeks ago, has a multi-million-dollar national company called, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, Colossus, I think. Yeah, I sent it to a couple of you. Anyway,
You just sent me that.
sorry?
Yeah, you sent it to me.
Okay. Did you get a chance to look at it at all?
I haven't.
Okay. All right. Colossus, multi-million dollars. He gets contracts from Coca-Cola, Chanel, Coach, that sell women's handbags. And he says, I will paint one painting on one wall by a painter, hand painted, that will be so beautiful it will attract people to come and take Instagram photos, and that may give you more publicity, but it also will transform maybe the neighborhood. So there's a neighborhood in Miami, a low-income neighborhood in Miami, which has been transformed and upgraded because of the Instagram photos, because of the tourists and others that have these rankings based on the picture on the wall. How's that for a new model of Jane Jacobs? I mean, so we got with Forrest Stewart, and with this, that is, we're seeing the interpenetration of social media, scenes, aesthetics, and economic development, profit, sales, and the actors may be government, they may be the private sector, they may be individual artists. And has anybody worked on this? No, it's brand new. Only a BA topic for USC sociology student. She's working simultaneously, I'll add. She commutes every day to Newport Beach, where she's spending her whole time with a consulting firm that's providing data to economic development for local firms in LA of where to locate, not just LA. She works with people with Atlanta and others, of where and how you ought to locate your businesses. So she generates neighborhood data. What's an attractive neighborhood? You're doing the same kind of thing for politics and for so forth. Right now, that is, just tell me in 2 sentences what I impolitely grilled you on last night.
I used to do like county reports when I worked with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, and I did very one-dimensional reports compared to like the multi-dimensional reports that scenes are doing. So I would do demographics, income levels, things like that are very basic.
Okay, so
the real estate term for this is site selection.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's what this is. It's real estate.
And you've consulted and done this off and on
Yes.
for a good chunk of your career. So
That's
so
right.
you know it well, and you're working now with a New York firm.
Yeah, I'm working now with a nonprofit in New York.
Okay, now
That
okay, so you don't have to talk about it if you'd rather not.
Right.
But you can. I mean, if you want to add another example, fine.
Well, what's interesting to me about this is that it takes the private sector idea of site selection, where do you place a McDonald's in a neighborhood, and it applies it to a blank wall in a neighborhood that might not be someplace that you would think of as being appealing to people. But it's the application of art to the built environment to create a tourist attraction.
And so the eyes on the street are also on the wall.
Right.
And then photos spread this dramatically, and so we get electronic enhancement of Jane Jacobs.
You're right,
in a
it is
very
very
powerful way. Okay, and that is buzz.
Yes,
Okay.
that is buzz.
So buzz, measuring, it's a measure, the number of hits are a measure of the buzz. So ways of using these new concepts like buzz to capture some of these new dynamics are one of the kinds of things which we want to try to explore. And we have someone there shaking his head a little bit who's worked in transportation. Have you seen anything like this in your sorry, just to finish the story about Juliet. So Juliet's working with a firm that's doing this kind of site selection data, and she's doing methods, I don't know exactly what they are, but she's getting traditional data. And they said, she told them a little bit about her interest in the arts and as a possible issue for site selection, and she might be your BA topic. And they said, well, they sort of laughed. They said, we'd be glad to read it when it's done. Okay, so the point is they're ignoring this. And so what we're trying to do is to bring these new ideas well, first, to show that these ideas work, they're powerful, they do have some impact, they mean that buzz matters, and that's what we do here, and again in Scenescapes and a variety of things. Working with policy people, I'll just mention one sentence that I, Dan Silver, James Murdoch, who is a Harris School graduate and a PhD, is now works with a consulting firm in Texas, one more guy in Australia, are consulting. We won an RFP with the National Endowment for the Arts, and we're consulting with them on all their evaluations, especially their approaches to evaluate the arts and how to evaluate their largest local products, which are called Our Town. So they have something like 300 of these around the U.S., and they're a liaison between a nonprofit, a local government, and the NEA. And they support the arts in some way, in transportation, in streets, in walls, in renovation of a neighborhood. But how do you evaluate them? How do you see if they have impact? So that especially as they're often very different from each other. So it's a very hard evaluation kind of question. And so we're learning and working with them at the same time. But the point is, this stuff of there are lots of artists who will say, of course the arts make a big difference. What's your data? Oh well, everybody knows that. Okay, so just one more paper that's in our set of 4, which was one of 4 papers on a guy. I'll start with the case. Theaster Gates, African American potter. Nobody'd heard of him 10 years ago. He was just making pots. He was a poor guy from the West Side. He now was crowned at the Venice Biennale the most important artist in the world 2 years ago. Why and how? He's developing little neighborhood activities right over there, right here, and right there. And the question then, which the people at the Harris School posed, is this generalizable? How can you leverage up from your cases of these specific instances? So there are 4 people who worked on MAs with us on these issues, ranging from participant observation in yoga classes where they don't do normal, where they talk, to Yasmin Arakan, and she was one of the 4 who presented at the meeting where we have these papers, and what she did was take all the zip codes in the U.S., get all the numbers of artists in every zip code in the U.S., estimate from the numbers of businesses that involve artistic activity, and the numbers of non-artists, and then to try to see if you have more artists in a neighborhood across 45,000 of these zip codes, does having more artists increase the income of the neighborhood? And the answer is yes. Is that, and so the normal criticism, oh, this is the yuppies, these are the rich people, only the rich people want art, ha. Live in Bronzeville, you say that's not the case at all. I mean, so I'm mentioning the poor, unemployed guys who want these videos, or the guys and gals in Bronzeville who are fascinated by music and dance, who may have no jobs or who are very low in income. So where and how the relationship between artists and increasing income varies. We replicate it. It's the first study ever to do this. We take 45,000 zip codes and we repeat the analysis at 7 levels of income. I'll put this on the video. There we go. 7 levels of income and occupation. It's called quantile analysis, and Yasmin Arakan has this in her great MA. And there's a video of her presenting this at the Midwest meeting, which I sent to maybe one or 2 of you. I'm not sure. But it's available, and it's an example of something that we're now exploring, and that is so. So the question is, how and why do these dynamics work? Because the coefficients are positive and significant, but we have 72 kinds of arts data from the U.S. Census at the neighborhood level, from potter to actor to website designer to art gallery to museum to other things. So some of these work positively with artists and in higher and lower income groups. And so where and why these work in ways, and so as I mentioned, race, class, gender, national origin explains 10%. How can we explain some more? And where and why do these things emerge, and where and why were they successful? And clearly a lot of it's going to be one person, one smart creative person like Theaster Gates happened to be a potter, and so pottery may be more important in his area. But what is there beyond that? I mean, he does a lot of things that are not pottery. He sings. He comes and sings about a problem. My father's home was taken away by the banks. They foreclosed on my father. So he's got great stuff, which join multiple arts from multiple sources with recycling and etc. Okay, so are the arts generalizable? These results suggest yes, that we've got large amounts of money, large amounts of interest by citizens. If I didn't say so, the core finding that we begin with here is the number of Americans who join civic organizations has doubled, and so it fits with the finding that we had with the NEA report with Jennifer. Mayors are doing this. It's having impact in terms of increasing, at least in we have cross-sectional as well as overtime analysis. Christine Sakamoto is doing causal priority of the chicken and egg problem. That's her it's a complicated issue which we're exploring that way. But it looks as if there's a net positive impact of the artists. But where and why that works in different contexts is something which is an open question. So I would say at least 2 or 3 of you might potentially maybe just write up some of your own experience. I mean, now that you've heard these kinds of examples, how have you seen this? I mean, you've talked about using the arts to encourage people to speak out who are mentally ill or mentally retarded, whatever. You've worked in transportation. Have any inklings of this come into things which you've used? Where and how might either the arts and or a scene, more generally the context, and how do these shift these patterns? And how third big issue, how could we measure public art like buildings that have this? Okay, LA. There's a new site which I sent a memo to a couple of you, and I can send it to people if we find appropriate from Victoria, and did I send it to you?
What you sent me is actually the log file.
Right. Yeah.
So
I'm trying to remember
somewhere.
Remember the name of it. It's called Scenescape City, something like that.
I have it.
Yeah, if you could even open it and just show the others right now. It shows there's a little circle with a sort of a quick image of a picture like these on the wall, and it shows. And I said, well, where are they in LA? I mean, not having seen it myself. And so is it there?
I think this might be.
Yes,
what you're referring to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so. I said, where are they? And they're in the arts district of downtown LA, and they're in Hollywood. So my next question was, to counter the normal argument, it's just money. Rich people have art, poor people don't. So I said, how about Pacific Palisades? How many? Pass it on around. How many of these do you see in Pacific Palisades? 0. How many in Beverly Hills? 0. How many in Pasadena? 0. So these are very rich areas of LA County which have no public art in this sense. So these things are not income driven in that simple sense, but they are potentially transforming neighborhoods. And then and so I mentioned the Miami example but so where and how do these things co-vary with other characteristics? We can learn ideally from, and Juliet's trying to figure out how to do this. Talk to people, talk to the artists. There's a one, I think it's an hour, at least it's a long session in CBS Morning News talking with. The guy from Brooklyn is doing this not just in Brooklyn. He's doing this in 120 cities across the U.S. So he's working with Coca-Cola, and all these places, and they're hiring local artists to go out and paint, and the local artists get. I mean, most local artists support themselves by driving taxis, swimming pool attendants, shoveling garbage. So if you can actually get to paint a sign, that's better than just being an Uber driver. Okay, that was his answer. That is, they said, "Are you making a lot of money?" And that for your people, and that basically what that was his answer. So how to systematize some of these arts impacts. Basically, I'm asking, following our working with the Mitch, with the. She's showing you the map there. Okay. So Mitch knows neighborhoods around the U.S. So Mitch may well have a critical. You can spread your fingers and it will get bigger. So you can see Beverly Hills and Pacific Palisades and so forth, and you can see other stuff. Okay, nobody, to our knowledge, has put this stuff together. Well, maybe the company that built it has, but they probably have street addresses and they probably put it in through Google or Google Maps or something like that. Could we get those data and analyze those data and then try to correlate the location of these with some of these other characteristics? That'd be a comparative, quantitative way of trying to do this. Should we try to do some interviews with people in Little Village and ask them where and how the arts add to, that is, where are all the public meetings held in Little Village? Do you have a sense? Where these gangs, the different civic groups, when they fight each other, they shout and they meet in, where they meet?
Mostly public parks, I believe.
It's a public park, but in the corner of the public park, there's a building, and what is it? It's a Mexican art museum. Okay, and there's a very activist, smart, politically sensitive woman who worked in the Department of Planning of the city of Chicago. She started the museum, and she works with everybody. And they all come, and they fight the alderman, but they regularly have meetings there. And so where and how there's an interpenetration, I'm mentioning the videos, the gangs. I mean, I don't know how much if you're interested where you want to stay away, or sorry, put differently, you're working on segregation as a project within the MHPC.
Exactly.
Okay. What, any more clues on what you're doing specifically?
They have an annual report, so research on that, on the annual report. So I don't think we're taking it further with advocacy. I don't think they're going to do that just yet. But I think we're just working on the report, I guess updating it because they had one last year.
What's in the report roughly?
Pretty much saying how a less segregated Chicago can save billions of dollars, and through it affects the education system, the crime rate, housing, of course. So pretty much how segregation, a less segregated Chicago can benefit all those systems.
Okay. And clearly that's been the stated position of the mayor. That is that. So what was the biggest issue for Mayor Rahm Emanuel in his first term? That is, why wasn't he reelected with a majority? He got a minority and they had to have a second election. Why? Anybody know? Okay. School segregation and school quality. That is he and the city and the school district closed, I've forgotten how many, but they closed a number of schools. The teachers union then attacked him and collaborated with some neighborhood groups to say this is racist, this is you're driving people out of the neighborhood, you're doing bad things. So he then went on, he had a 1 hour, I think, interview, which is available on the educational WBEZ, I think it is. And he said basically the most important thing for poor people in Chicago and in general is education. We can help them do better and improve themselves. And I always came from a poor Jewish background, and education was the most important thing, which I knew from that background. So he and his brother had just published a book about this, about their family. So it was not only family and background, but it was a story, and he was passionate, he was emotional, and it wasn't good politics. And that is, what did it leave out, which is critical in Chicago as a scene characteristic around the schools, which he left out there. He's talking about one individual, or many poor individuals, can rise better if they're more educated. What did he leave out? That's sort of scene related, that I've told you about. Almost. The gangs. Crime. The danger. I live across the street from Dunbar High School. Dunbar High School has Chicago police cars show up 15 minutes before the kids get out, and the police cars escort those kids that don't live in that neighborhood because they could get shot walking through, 2 blocks, 3 blocks that are the area, the turf of a hostile gang. Okay. So the Rahm Emanuel, very smart mayor, chief of staff to Obama in the White House, became mayor of Chicago. In his first term, closed the schools, so we have to improve education. The teachers' union attacked him. The teachers' union president almost ran for mayor against him. She was very emotional and mobilized a big theme in Chicago, which is a counter theme, which is neighborhood solidarity in neighborhood schools, which are important for the community and our relationships with our fellow neighborhood residents, illustrated by the gangs. That is, the gangs are organized by 1 block, 2 block, 3 blocks, 4 blocks, and they're very turf-oriented. So turf is a major political concept in Chicago in ways that it is not in LA or many more individualistic locations, where they'll talk about either more abstract policies or how it may affect one individual, but not in this okay. So where and how the concepts, such a concept as turf, may enter, and how collectivism reinforces this, say in some Chinese cities maybe more than others. How much is Guangzhou or the coastal cities more individualistic compared to the inland cities, which are more communal? This has been documented for years. And the extreme version is Hong Kong or Guangzhou, where they have very low taxes and where they have classically much more international trade and faster economic growth. Okay, so the point is, it's not just the taxes, it's not just that. If there's individualist, how much is the entrepreneurship and the ambition of the individuals, and how can we capture those multiple themes, are factors which could be part of your PhD, of where do people go for jobs and why. I'm giving a couple of examples and saying, if we have ideas of how to use some of these data, either quantitative from this source, if we can get it from the people who do the app, great, but probably we can't. But we might try to ask. If there's another source we could get nationally, possibly something from NEA or others, or if we might do some case studies joined with, say, you've got an active job through the summer with Metropolitan Planning Council. If we can find ways that this overlaps, and you can see where and how, folding into the MHPC official report, the kinds of themes which I'm mentioning, which may qualify the workings of some of those dynamics, or at least if you have a causal arrow, it suggests there's several boxes along that causal arrow that if we explicate them, we may get a sharper sense of how and why it's strong, but how there may be some critical intervening links. And if you draw a direct line, it maybe explain 10%. If you add other things, it may explain more. Okay, so either through some case study work and/or then talking with activist groups, and then why are these activist groups successful? And which theme should they use? What should they tweet about? And so we've had several people have done MAs, one PhD on the social media in that way. So far as Stewart started with the social media, I mean, looking at so you found these videos of these guys, and then dug behind it, and a whole new story emerges. Okay, so possible way of, theme of thinking with what you've got. If we move around, let me. I mean, I'm talking a lot, and I'm making a couple of explicit points. But why don't we go around the room again and let each of you, if you're looking for one or two topics, maybe to start on this week, what might these be? What if we go the other way this time? And if you even want to suggest anything for others, please go ahead and do so. If not, we can pass. But
I'll pass.
okay, fine.
You know,
And why don't you mention your names again as we start to get to know each other? Go ahead.
all right, Ryan Morgan again. Again, I'm pretty new here, but I think I'm not really sure exactly what I want to start on, but I think this idea of buzz is really interesting, and the idea of looking at all of the street art and the locations and activity in that location, what that might say about other factors. So maybe something in that vein.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Jim, any quick thoughts, or you'd rather pass? Your choice.
Sure, Jim Bunce. For now, I'll pass.
Okay. Great. Next. Any ideas that you want to think about, or that you already have but you'd like to sharpen as part of your PhD? How does this work in China with your data that you have now, or that we can merge with your data?
Okay, I think maybe.
We have 1,000 variables on Chinese local areas.
Yeah. When I read my first English paper, the journal asked me to provide the data to the journal, to share the data. I answered this question. Maybe everyone could get the data from the website of the government, because I asked the staff of the government. He replied me that everyone could apply this data in their website. She will determine which they are qualified to use the data or not. So maybe everyone want to use the data of want to use my data. He could apply in the website. I think it's a very useful information.
But your original data, which you talked about before, was only about 6 variables.
Yeah, but I make sure again, because the journal asked me to.
No, but do you have new additional variables, or only those same ones?
A lot of variables.
Okay.
Additional variables.
Okay. So you're suggesting we or you might help us. Let me ask you, could you help us write to that website and say, Terry Clark and others are working on scenes and would like to use these data, and we're not trying to make money, we're trying to analyze it. Could we acquire the data?
I think it is.
Okay. Please do, and
okay.
we will try to add and merge
okay.
these to our Chinese data.
Yeah, I will apply the data for you, and if they ask me some details or some information about you, I will send an email
Sure,
to you
sure.
and contact
Good.
you.
Excellent. I mean, now this is how we've gotten most of our Chinese data. So we've
Okay.
gotten it from people like you who were here in Chicago, who are working with a Chinese government agency, and they've been here for 2 years, 3 years. They know us, they trust us, and the ministry trusts them. And that's how we got 1,000. Otherwise, we'd have nothing.
Okay, I could apply for you.
Okay, good.
Okay. I need to write your information, write your name, write your you works in the University of Chicago, and your purpose is to analyze more about the economy or sociology program of China, maybe I think it's okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could, maybe I think we could get the data. If we don't get the data, it's no problem, but
Okay.
we need to try.
Any concepts or propositions based on any of this discussion today? Like, why is income positively or negatively related to city size? And it's a multi-level analysis issue. The income of the city as a whole may be positively related to
The size of the city.
to size of the city, whereas some individual incomes may be negatively related. But where and how by sector, private, public, big, small, et cetera, and then add as well, say Hong Kong, Guangdong, or U.S. cities, and how it varies by city. I don't know how much that's been. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, there are people who've analyzed some of that, but you haven't really pursued that seriously. Is my simple point.
I see.
And this is the main idea of George Tully for 30 years.
Oh, I
So
see.
you're ignoring his main point, which I'm telling you.
Okay, I see.
That is he and many smart students. The other one, just to mention another name, Edward Glaser at Harvard is probably the leading urban economist today. He's a student at
right.
George and others here,
Oh,
and he's taking the position that the income is negative, whereas some new people are now mentioning basically the MHPC report implies the opposite. That if we reduce segregation, we'll increase the income of Chicago. That's the opposite of some. It's potentially that is, if segregation is a negative amenity and leads people not to come to Chicago and et cetera. Whereas if we had more integration and more people came to Chicago, more businesses were here, more investment, that would increase. I mean, that sounds like a core idea. It's in contradiction, I'm pointing out, with these potential findings. Okay, so it's not as if I'm deliberately, pointing to how these things can work in ways that we haven't fully articulated and elaborated, and they have immediate policy implications. Okay. Kumar, anything you wanna speak to at this point?
So I was thinking about, I don't know what to do with it, but when you're talking about art, there's a place in Chicago called the Happy Place, and it's essentially a scene created by social media since it's mobile and it kind of comes to different cities. And so it doesn't really have a place identity, and it kind of invites the people who go to the place to be the artists versus being a place where the artist itself exists. So I just thought that was kind of interesting, and it reminded me of some of the topics that you were talking about.
Okay, well maybe looking it up a little bit and finding out more about it, and thinking and then reading on with the Scenescapes book. You wrote some very good comments on the first chapter, and we can go from there.
See you next week.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else from you two, or you've already got pretty clear agendas, I think. Any new reactions to any discussion today or in your recent readings you want to talk about?
Okay. I want to choose some typical communities in different areas in China to conduct a case study, applying the theory of things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great.
And I'll communicate with you and to gain your instruction.
Now, as you know, there are 5 teams working on scenes in China now. So I'd say linking with them in some way so they're choosing their different neighborhoods in Beijing, but they've also gone, for instance, to a town which made traditional porcelain, and they're trying to go from a 19th century porcelain product to new forms of art. And so they're trying to look for new forms of art to start and so this is one town, and Wu Jun, or has worked with folks who are doing PhDs on some of that. So maybe working with Wu Jun and the others would be helpful for you and for them to share some of these ideas as they're exploring scenes-related ideas, mostly in a qualitative. Most of the PhD work is qualitative, and that's what you want to do more of. There's also the guy I mentioned who's an MD, Chinese MD, who's here at UIC learning about American hospital service delivery, and maybe that would be useful for you too.
Maybe I'll visit him before I return to Beijing.
Good.
Thank
Okay. Anything else?
Actually, the data collection has not yet finished right now, and maybe after sorting data, we can make some discussion from through emails. And now I'm just talking to Carrie and Jun to talk about my scenes.
Okay. So Carrie Wu.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Now Carrie Wu was in Toronto as a
Yes.
very active
Maybe he
Chinese
has
collaborator. Wonderful.
Am I taking on, the gang topic?
I'd say maybe your whole, your choice to me to review the MHPC report, and then to think about at this point I'd say start a log, say here's some options, and then try to lay out some options in your own words. So this is, think about it for 24. Start to lay some things out, lay them out. Send them to me. I'll try to, we can email back and forth. But I'd say at this point, think more of options rather than anything you're fully committed to for life or for a week or 2 weeks. But I'd say think about options for especially where this is a lot of this is brand new to many of you. Okay, Mio.
So I can take the multi-level modeling stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now maybe you and I should talk about that separately, as that gets a little bit technical. All right. Anything else we want to add?
As far as projects go, I'm new, just a heads up. So just spitballing, but maybe looking at a multi-level modeling of this may be because I've been watching nonstop news about this, but Ohio's 12th district just had a special election, and its last congressional leader won. The Republican nominee won by 30 points. Trump won the district by 11 points. And now, as of 3 hours ago, the election was still too close to call, and it's been 24 hours. So seeing the political culture's evolution in that area, and maybe just different, looking at the specific scenes, because a lot, if you are watching an insane amount of news about this like I am, a lot of it's saying oh, suburban white women are, anti-Trump, and that's why the election is suddenly so close. But it definitely is more than just that. So maybe looking at specifically the scenes and how it's kind of transformed and evolved over time. I don't know, again, just spitballing. So maybe looking into that and seeing how Ohio's 12th district has responded to Trump and GOP leaders. I don't know.
No, but Ohio is very hot, and exactly these questions are being asked by lots of national actors who are going to Ohio and spending lots of money from the labor unions, the civic groups, and so forth. But building on that, and if maybe looking a little bit if you can find either some thoughtful writing. A lot of this will be confidential and private, but if some of it is public, like the MHPC report. That you in turn could build on, that would be great. Okay, we're near the end. Mitch, do you have any closing observations, suggestions for us?
Well, not in the way of suggestions, but
stories.
So I not too long ago I was attending a reading at a bookstore, and this was being held in the part of the store adjacent to the children's department, and my interest was piqued by the having cited a children's book about Jane Jacobs that has come out.
Fantastic. All right, that's a new first I hadn't heard of before. So you're ahead of everyone else, and it's great to see you've done it again. I bet that our professor of Jane Jacobs and founder of the James Walk in Chicago doesn't know the book, but we got to get her a copy. Okay, or tell her about it. All right, why don't we quit for now? If we have any forms to sign or any official or things you want to talk about individually and privately, we can do so. And